With 5% of our people on the farms, we are feeding this year 200 million Americans, 60 million Indians entirely, and 100 million people in other countries. The Russians, with 50%, nearly half of their population still on the farms, are not able to feed themselves. If we were as far ahead of the Russians in the space race as we are in agriculture, we'd be running a shuttle service to the moon by now. Be running a shuttle service to the moon by now. It's simply no contest. What's been the effect of this on the third world, the less developed, low-income, uncommitted countries? I think it's beginning to have an impact, because clearly one system works and the other does not. I think it's 2 years ago this spring, President Nasser of Egypt, the UAR, decided that he didn't like something that we were doing and told us in effect to go jump into the Mediterranean, or however you say that in Arabic. And in response, we cut off food shipments. The Russians stepped in, playing the hero role as they sometimes do, and said, "Don't worry, if the Americans won't ship you food, we will." And they agreed to provide Nasser with 300,000 tons of wheat. This compares with about 1.5 million tons that we've been putting in each year in recent years. Shortly after the Russians made this commitment, they discovered they were coming up with another short crop of their own, and that they would have to go to Canada and buy wheat to make good on their commitment to Nasser. Well, this had some interesting dimensions. First of all, in buying Canadian wheat, they were removing some wheat, one of our prime sources of commercial competition in the world wheat market. In order to buy the Canadian wheat, they were selling gold in Zurich and in London. And this was strengthening the dollar, because it's gold that backs the dollar. And the third very useful aspect of this was that in feeding some of the Egyptian people, it was only 300,000 tons of wheat, but in feeding some of them, they were taking care of a small part of the world food problem, a part that we didn't have to worry about. And we began to think that all three were very useful. But it wasn't long before we got some inquiries indirectly from the Russians as to when we might resume our food aid program in the UAR. It was a very costly thing for the Russians. But since then, on every opportunity, whether it be India or Afghanistan or Algeria, we've urged them to go to the Soviet Union to get some food aid. And this has served some useful purposes. It's demonstrated for them, reminded them that the system isn't working, and it's embarrassed the Russians, because the Russians invariably have to say, "No, we can't help you." I think it's been very good. It was quite some time during the early post-colonial period after World War II, when there were many newly independent countries, quite some time when these countries were quite content with slogans and flag waving and fancy stadiums and other symbols of nationalism. But the age of nationalism and ideology appears to be on the wane. And these people are no longer content with slogans and flag waving, because they're hungry now. They're hungry, hungrier than they've ever been before, many of them. And they have to look to the area where the food is and where the food producing know-how is. And in today's world, that's North America. This, I think, has been a significant factor in shifting the balance of power decisively from the East to the West. It's also been an important factor in the Pacific, in the Asian area. One of the real successes of our foreign policy since World War II has been the ability to tie the Japanese economy closely to our own. In 1949, after the communist Chinese take over the mainland, there was considerable apprehension that Japan might be drawn into the Chinese orbit. And Japan and China are natural trading partners. China has traditionally provided the soybeans and the rice, some of the other products that the Japanese on their very densely populated island must import. But China has not been able to provide these commodities. We have soybeans, rice, wheat, corn, cotton, a whole host of commodities, a flow of commodities, farm products from the U.S. to Japan across the Pacific this year that will probably exceed $1 billion. We've had the food to exchange with the Japanese for industrial products. Although Japan, in geographic terms, is off the coast of China, in economic terms, it's off the coast of California today. We've drawn the Japanese very closely to our own economy, so close that it would be almost impossible for them to seriously consider moving away again. I'm convinced now that the East-West polarization is beginning to diminish. I think we see this in many ways. I think one of the reasons is because the balance of power has shifted so clearly toward the West. But unfortunately, there's a new polarization developing, as I see it, and this I would term a north-south polarization between the rich industrial countries of the north and the poor, less developed countries of the south, of Asia, of Africa, and Latin America. And the gap between these two groups of countries is widening all the time. And this gap is an economic gap. It's very different than the ideological gap that separated the East and the West. As food supplies tighten, it's the less developed countries that are being hurt the most. It's the less developed countries that are doing the belt tightening, not the rich countries. As rice prices go up, it's not Japan that reduces its imports. It's India or the Philippines or Indonesia. As wheat supplies tighten, it's not England or West Germany that reduces its imports, but it's the less developed countries that don't have the purchasing power. Impressive though our food producing capability is in North America, that we cannot feed the world. In 1966, in order to meet severe food shortage in India, we shipped the equivalent of almost 1/4 of our wheat crop there. This required some 600 ships, probably the largest assemblage of ships since we crossed the English Channel on D-Day. In spite of this tremendous movement of food, and it was all on a gift basis, it wasn't a commercial sale. In spite of this tremendous movement of food, we did not succeed in maintaining consumption levels in India. They dropped last year below the year before, and they're going to drop further this year.